All right, let's dive into this explainer. Have you ever looked at a map of the world and just stared at that massive, endless stretch of blue? I mean, out there are no borders, no fences, and definitely no obvious police presence. It just seems totally ungovernable, right? But the reality of managing international waters is incredibly complex, and it requires a massive amount of legal and logistical coordination. So today, we're going to break down a true landmark piece of international agreement, the 2017 Jeddah Amendment to the Djibouti Code of Conduct. To really set the stakes here, we have to ask ourselves, how exactly do you police the unpoliceable? How does a diverse network of 20 different nations act as a collaborative sheriff in the literal Wild West of the Western Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden? Think about the geography for a second. We are talking about some of the absolute busiest, most critical maritime trade routes on the entire planet. Millions of barrels of oil, millions of tons of cargo, all passing through these waters. Protecting them isn't a job for just one country. It requires a perfectly synchronized multinational effort across borders, languages, and entirely different legal systems. So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to quickly hit 5 key areas. First, the maritime threat landscape. Second, the Jeddah Amendment explained. Third, defining the crimes. Fourth, national and regional solutions. And lastly, protecting the blue economy. Let's get right into it. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the maritime threat landscape. We really need to zoom out first to understand the specific threats we're dealing with here. When most of us hear crimes at sea, I know our minds instantly go to Hollywood depictions of pirates swinging onto cargo ships. And yeah, piracy is absolutely a core issue. But as this slide brilliantly illustrates, the threats out there go way, way beyond that. The source document outlines a massive scope of transnational organized crime. We're talking trafficking in arms and narcotics, but it also includes the illegal wildlife trade, smugglers literally using ocean routes to move endangered plants and animals. Then you've got illegal oil bunkering, human smuggling, and even the illegal dumping of toxic waste. It's a highly organized, multi-layered criminal enterprise operating right out there on the open water. Which brings us to Section 2, the Jeddah Amendment explained. Once the international community realized the sheer scale of these interconnected crimes, they knew they needed a much stronger net. And this timeline is super interesting because it shows how that realization played out. Back in 2006, reported piracy incidents actually dropped to a low. Good news, right? Well, yes, but the underlying systemic threats were still very much alive. So by 2009, the Djibouti Code of Conduct was adopted to specifically repress piracy, which was a fantastic foundation. But criminals adapt. As the threats evolved beyond just piracy into all those broader crimes we just looked at, the law literally had to evolve too. Fast forward to January 2017, the participating states met in Saudi Arabia to upgrade this entire framework, resulting in the Jeddah Amendment. It dramatically widened the scope of the 2009 code to tackle the whole shebang of illicit maritime activities. And the crucial point here is that this isn't just theory. Just look at these physical signature pages from the 2017 meeting. We're seeing countries like Comoros, France, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, sovereign nations, both coastal and landlocked, making an unprecedented, tangible commitment to regional cooperation. It's a literal pact to share intelligence and coordinate operations across thousands of miles of ocean while still respecting each other's territorial integrity. That is huge. Moving into Section 3, defining the crimes. Because in international law, definitions are absolutely everything. You see, you can't prosecute a crime if you don't have a shared legal understanding of what that crime actually is. The Jeddah Amendment is incredibly specific about this, leaning on established law like the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Here is a really vital legal boundary, the difference between piracy and armed robbery. It depends entirely on where the crime happens. If acts of violence or depredation happen for private ends on the high seas, meaning international waters outside anyone's jurisdiction, that is officially piracy. But if that exact same act happens within a specific state's internal or territorial waters, legally, that is defined as armed robbery against ships. This isn't just semantics, it dictates exactly who has the primary authority to respond, investigate, and actually prosecute the offenders. We also have to define IUU fishing. The UN General Assembly calls this one of the greatest threats to global food security and sustainable ocean resources. IUU stands for illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And the Jeddah Amendment specifically targets this because it is not just about stealing some fish, it's an absolute environmental and economic disaster. We're talking about massive vessels fishing without permission, blowing past conservation measures, or just not reporting their catches. For developing coastal states, this is literally stealing food out of the mouths of their citizens and wrecking local livelihoods. All right, on to Section 4, National and Regional Solutions. Because knowing the crimes is one thing, but how do they actually stop them? How do you turn a signed paper into real-world action on the Indian Ocean? The answer is a highly structured flow of communication. First, every participating state has to designate a national focal point. Then, if a threat is detected, that alert is immediately pushed to specific regional information sharing centers. There are hubs in Mombasa, Kenya, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Sana'a, Yemen. By having these nerve centers, a distress call in one area can instantly trigger a broadcast to the entire regional network. It seamlessly feeds into coordinated transnational rescue or interdiction operations. They can literally stop criminals in their tracks. But a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right? To make this regional network actually function, every signatory state has to implement these strict domestic policies within their own borders. They have to form national multi-agency security committees. They have to update their own national laws. Because if you catch a smuggler, you need the legal teeth to prosecute them in a local court. They also agreed to mandate vessel monitoring systems, or VMS, to track fishing vessels and prevent that IUU fishing we talked about, while actively guarding against fraudulent ship registrations. It's a ton of homework for every country involved. And that leads us perfectly into our final section, Section 5, Protecting the Blue Economy. Let's zoom back out and ask, why does this matter so much? Well, all of these rules and tracking systems serve a much larger, very human purpose. The document states, and I quote, "Developing the blue economy will help to ensure sustainable economic growth, food security, employment, prosperity, and stability." This perfectly encapsulates that this isn't just some boring list of maritime rules. It is a desperate fight to protect human survival. The blue economy is all about sustainably managing fisheries, securing offshore energy, and keeping maritime trade safe. If the ocean is ruled by organized crime, shipping lines reroute, ports bleed money, fishermen lose their catch, and entire national economies can just completely destabilize. And I think this might be the most self-aware, fascinating part of the whole document. The amendment openly acknowledges that until we fix the systemic issues of poverty on land, we are never going to fully eliminate the crimes occurring at sea. Piracy and smuggling don't just happen in a vacuum, you know? They're often born from really desperate conditions on the coast. A truly comprehensive approach means that alongside all this maritime law enforcement, there has to be a real concerted effort to address poverty and create legitimate employment on land. Which leaves us with a pretty massive, provocative question to think about. As transnational crime continues to adapt, will this regional network remain strong enough to secure the future of our oceans? The Jeddah Amendment was a monumental leap forward, for sure, turning a single-issue anti-piracy coalition into a robust network fighting all forms of organized crime. But as criminals find new technologies and exploit new loopholes, these 20 nations are going to have to constantly evolve their laws and their communication. The ungovernable ocean is slowly being governed, but the work is absolutely far from over. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how the systems around us actually work.